we didn't make the right choice. And so for that, I know as a Christian father that there's not a 24-year-old girl here because of my choice.
Of all the painful memories still running through my head, I wonder how much different things would be, dear younger me.
Jeff Bradford was a successful business owner, a husband, a dad, and he and his wife were leaders in their church. But there was an issue in their past that they hadn't dealt with until God opened their eyes. Jeff is our guest on this episode of GPS, God, People, Stories. I'm Jim Kirkland.
And I'm Phil Fleischman. You might say abortion is the subplot of Jeff's story. The main plot really is redemption. God taking our mistakes and reworking them for good.
GPS. God, People, Stories.
Jeff and Tricia Bradford have 4 living children, 2 sons and 2 daughters. Their 5th child was never born.
We were engaged to be married, and we got pregnant. We were not serving the Lord at that point the way that we should have been, and we got pregnant. And I went to my family, my father, and really before you knew it, we were at Planned Parenthood, and we took the life of our first child.
At the time, they didn't realize that having an abortion was taking a life.
We believed a lot of the lies that you hear in the press today and from our government, and yet we didn't talk about it for 17 years.
And even then, they didn't set out to start talking about it. They'd been in church leadership for years, and after a particularly intense time of ministry, they decided they could use some counseling. It was just meant to be what Jeff called a tune-up.
So we went to a Christian counselor, and that first day that we walked in the counseling office, we closed the door to that office, and my wife began to cry just uncontrollably. And I had never seen her like that. I thought, gosh, is our marriage in worse shape than I thought? What is really going on? Had she been abused as a child?
It wasn't long before Tricia explained that the tears were over the abortion they'd had 17 years earlier. From that moment, she and Jeff began to watch God bring about healing in their lives. Tricia went through abortion recovery counseling.
For me, it was a process of really beginning to share my testimony and work in the life issue. And so God allows you to use your testimony. When we share those things that we think that were meant for evil, but use it to God's glory, He begins to really do some miraculous healing.
For example, the same week that Tricia broke down in the counselor's office, Jeff had another surprise encounter with the abortion issue. This one was through the consulting practice he owned and a man named Brian Fisher.
Brian was the COO of a large communications company, and his firm hired me and my partners to come in, and I met Brian Fisher. And as we got to know each other, one day he handed me what was called Online for Life, now called Human Coalition. His card said, hey, we're a group of volunteers that some of the best internet marketers and technologists that are using the internet and technology to save babies from abortion. And that was the same week that my wife and I were in counseling. And so I knew God was doing something. I went home that night. I'll never forget. I put his card down where I plug in my phone every night, and I was like shaking my head saying, oh, Lord, what are you doing? I knew God was doing something. And as yet, this is the last thing I wanted to do. Is I was already facing the abortion really head on for the first time. And God just kept drawing me back in.
Jeff was struck by Brian Fisher's vision for combining things like business technology, best practices, data, and metrics, all in trying to stop abortion.
It was everything that we had taught in our consulting practice, what we had built as a business. And so I was really intrigued that he was combining those aspects. And yet at the end of that, it was not profitability, but lives being saved, people being impacted, and so it was one of those things that I just couldn't walk away from.
In the space of a week, Jeff had gained a new understanding of what abortion really is. As he describes it, God dropped the scales from his eyes.
Really, as a Christian father and husband, and really as an American citizen, I could not believe what was going on in America, that we were losing 3,500 children every day to abortion. And so that was really the beginning of my journey of God beginning to really create awareness of what this Holocaust really I just couldn't let that go.
Eventually, Jeff and Brian quit their jobs to start the ministry that's now known as Human Coalition. Today, it employs more than 100 people and serves 34 pro-life crisis pregnancy centers in 14 states.
It's been amazing for me to be a part of this because we've now saved over 5,000 children and families from having to go through the pain of losing a child. That's incredibly rewarding for us.
We asked Jeff to elaborate on what it is exactly that stirs that emotion in him.
Well, God forgives us. There's no sin bigger than the cross of Christ. But yet there's always the pain of knowing that we didn't make the right choice. And so for that, I know as a Christian father that there's not a 24-year-old girl here because of my choice. But it's also the joy of knowing that God redeems.
If I knew then what I know now, would have not been hard to figure out what I would have changed if I had heard dear younger me.
One of the biggest ways Jeff sees God's redemption in his life is through his work with Human Coalition and what that ministry is doing to end abortion.
Human Coalition's mission is to make abortion unthinkable and then unavailable in our lifetime, much like other holocausts of slavery that at one time for 5,000 years was not unthinkable, now today is unthinkable.
To accomplish that, Human Coalition uses a multi-pronged approach.
One is what we call a marketing lab, which is to reach women who are planning to abort, who are actively scheduling abortions. We use the internet to do that. There's over 1.8 million searches every month. We then have a call center that we take the calls.
Another important part of Human Coalition's strategy is a network of pro-life pregnancy centers that minister to women considering abortion. Human Coalition owns or partners with about 36 such centers across the country. Other parts of the multi-pronged approach include church outreach and what they call a continuum of care.
Continuum of care is really walking with these women in healing, bridging them into the church, and so we have some wonderful partnerships with churches across the country. In fact, we also work in legal means to help, as we would say, disinvite abortion clinics in the areas that we're working and looking at ways to really expose some of the things that they're doing. So we feel like God's really moving to help end abortion, and so Human Coalition is really looking at every human being is made in the image of God, but we also have to coalesce the movement and people to make abortion unthinkable in our lifetime.
The ministry's been working at that goal for about 4.5 years now. In that time, they say they've saved more than 5,000 babies. And most of those babies' moms had already made the decision that they were going to have an abortion.
We only really deal with that segment of the population of those that are actively scheduling. And so it is a very difficult client because they've already made the decision to abort. And so we're intervening and stepping in the gap there to reverse that decision.
Someone stepping in the gap. That's what Jeff says was missing for Tricia and him when they were facing their unplanned pregnancy 24 years ago.
When you're in that situation and you don't have someone standing in the gap